In order to discuss this next concept in microeconomics, I'd like to reference an example. I'm going to introduce an example of a fictional company, and we're going to use a lot of the elements and the qualities about this circumstance to help us better understand a couple very important concepts in microeconomics pertaining to firms. Okay? So let's pretend that we have this company. The name of the company is UGI Corp. They make a product. They produce and sell a product called the LTK 4217. The LTK 4217 is a household product. It is sold in many stores that we're all familiar with, and it's not only produced by UGI Corp. It's produced by a lot of different companies throughout the world. And this product is completely made out of wood. And so the way that UGI Corp produces this product is with a very large machine and very expensive machine made by what's called the Miggy company, and it's called the Miggy 630 Deluxe. Now, here's some interesting things about the Miggy 630 Deluxe. There's a manual that goes along with the Miggy 630 Deluxe, an operator's manual, and it tells you a lot of very important things about the machine and how to use it for production. And it says that ideally you will operate the Miggy 630 Deluxe with 3 operators, and that each operator on the machine will require some equipment. Each worker is going to need a pair of goggles, a pair of gloves, and a small toolkit. Nothing big, not a toolbox, just a small toolkit with some small tools that help them to be able to operate the machine and work with the product as it's produced. Okay. Now there is because the product is made out of wood, the LTK 4217 is 100% wood. The input into the machine is basically a 50-pound bag of wood chips that they get from like a lumber mill. And so what they do is they take a 50-pound bag of wood chips and they pour it into the machine, and then they operate the machine, and out the other side comes these products, this LTK 4217. Okay. Now, what the manual says is that if you operate the Miggy 630 Deluxe with 3 operators in an 8-hour period, you will produce 100 units of the LTK 4217. And in order to do that, during the 8-hour period, you're going to need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 50-pound bags of wood chips. Okay? And so what will happen is at the beginning of a shift, at the beginning of the 8 hours, these 3 operators will get together, they'll get their equipment. 1 or 2 of them will take a cart and they'll go over to a place in the factory where they have these 50-pound bags of wood chips, and they'll load 7 bags onto this cart and bring it back over to the Miggy 630 Deluxe, while the other person, let's say, turns it on, warms it up, does a couple things to get it ready. And then they start pouring bags of wood chips into the machine, and then the LTK 4217s start coming out the other side. And like I said, in 8 hours, they will produce a quantity of 100 units. Okay? After producing for 8 hours, the manual from the Miggy Corp says that the machine, the Miggy 630 Deluxe, then has to cool down for 4 hours. It requires a 4-hour cool down period. Without the 4-hour cool down period, you run the risk of damaging the machine because the parts have been stressed so greatly during the 8-hour period. Now there is a note in the operator manual that says that the Miggy 630 Deluxe can produce with only 2 operators. Okay, so if you have these 3 operators, if one of them is sick and has to call out and only 2 of them show up for work, they can still produce the product on the machine, but look at this, but the quantity is going to be less than 100. So if you don't have 3 operators, you're not going to get 100 units. Okay. And so I want to point out a couple things that we already understand about microeconomics that are related to this situation. First of all, the Miggy 630 Deluxe is an example of capital that is used by a business, right? Our factors of production are land, labor, and capital, right? Well, the MIGI 630 Deluxe is an example of capital. The operator equipment is another example of capital. The 3 operators, that's our example of labor, and the 50-pound bags of wood chips, that's our example of land. So we've got our land, our labor, and our capital, and we're bringing them together in the factory owned by UGI Corp to produce output. What output? A product, a household product that's designated LTK 4217, and we're going to produce 100 of them every 8 hours, okay? And then one other thing that I want to point out is the difference between fixed resources and variable resources. We have both of those here as well. Remember the difference between fixed resources and variable resources. Variable resources, we need more of them when we increase our quantity of production. And when we produce a quantity of 0, we don't need any of them at all. So if we don't need any of them to produce 0, it's a variable resource. Similarly, fixed resources, if we produce 0 quantity, then we still have to pay for them and we still have them. So let's say one day something happens and they can't open up the factory for a day. So on that day, UGI Corp is going to produce 0 units. Well, on that day, they won't need any wood chips. On that day, they won't need any of their workers, but they will still have their machines. It's not like they can say, well, we don't need the machine today. The machine is there. It's in the factory. They already have it. They have to make the payment on the machine, whether they produce or not. But if they don't produce, they don't have to pay for wood chips. If they don't produce, they don't have to pay for their operators. And so what we have here is that the machine, the MIGI 630 Deluxe, that is a fixed resource, and it accounts for fixed costs. But the operators and the wood chips, those are variable resources, and so they account for the variable costs. Now, the operator equipment is argumentative. Some people will characterize the operator equipment as a fixed resource, and other people will characterize it as a variable resource. And since this is a principles class, we're just not going to get into that argument. But it's worth thinking about on your own, philosophically. Would you characterize the operator equipment as a fixed resource, or would you characterize it as a variable resource? Okay? And so now that we have this example, what we're going to do is we're going to learn one more thing about UGI Corp, and then we're going to learn about a concept called, well, that I call productive capacity in a firm. All right, the last thing that I want to tell you about UGI Corp before we get into the concept of productive capacity is that UGI Corp has 5 MIGI 630 Deluxes in their factory. Okay, and they can fit a maximum of 5 of them in their factory. They only have so much space, and so they've arranged their factory just so they can just fit in 5 of these machines and be able to produce as much quantity as they can so that they can earn revenue and so that they can make a profit. So what we're going to talk about is a concept that I call productive capacity of a firm. Okay, let's start with a definition. Productive capacity is the maximum possible quantity a firm can produce in a time period under a fixed set of circumstances. Okay. All right. And so let's talk about this definition and refer to the example that we have of UGI Corp. Okay. So there's 3 things going on here in this definition of productive capacity. Okay. First of all, productive capacity. Okay. So capacity is like a limit, like the capacity of a, let's say a certain car might be 5 passengers. Okay, that's the capacity. The capacity of a milk jug, the container, is 1 gallon. okay? So capacity is like a maximum limit. And then productive means production, like production quantity, what we are producing and selling. So this is a limit on what a firm can produce and sell. So it is the maximum possible quantity a firm can produce. And then, technically speaking, there is no limitation if we go, to infinity, if we go out to eternity, okay? So we have to limit the time period. So we say in a time period, so we've got a maximum possible quantity, that's one part, of production a firm can produce, in a time period, so in a limited amount of time, and given or under a fixed set of circumstances. So we have this fixed set of circumstances, okay? And so for UGI Corp, so what we're going to do is we're going to define this maximum possible quantity, we're going to define the time period for UGI Corp, and we're going to define UGI Corp's fixed set of circumstances, okay? Then we're going to explore it a little more deeply, okay? So let's start with what is the maximum possible quantity? Well, I want you to remember that the machine, the MIGI 630 Deluxe, we said that it can produce a maximum quantity of 100 in, now listen, it's in an 8-hour period, but then it requires a 12-hour cool down. And therefore, we can take that 4-hour cool down and add it to the 8-hour production period for an entire production and cool down period of 12 hours. So this MIGI 630 Deluxe can produce 100 units in 12 hours. Now listen, that's not the whole company. That's the productive capacity of one machine in a time period of 12 hours, okay? And so with one machine, the maximum quantity is 100 in 12 hours, but I want you to remember that UGI Corp has 5 of these, okay? So there are 5 MIGI, let's just call them MIGIs, okay? There are 5 MIGIs, so UGI Corp, because they have 5 of these machines, in a 12-hour period, they can actually produce 500 units, okay? But let's say that their time period is 1 day. And now understand, we can change the time period. Changing the time period just changes the number. But I mean, all we're doing is multiplying by a number of days or, dividing by a number of hours or something like that. So let's just say for the sake of argument that it's 1 day, and that's 24 hours, okay? And so notice that there are 2 12-hour periods in 24 hours. And since 12 hours happens 2 times in 24 hours, then this MIGI 630 Deluxe can actually produce 100 units 2 times. So that's 200 units. And UGI Corp has 5 of them. And so if they have 5 things that can produce 200 in 24 hours, well then 5 times 200 is a quantity of 1,000. So UGI Corp's productive capacity in 1 day, their maximum possible quantity, given that they have 5 MIGI 630 Deluxes, their maximum possible quantity is 1,000 units. And so UGI Corp, their productive capacity is 1,000 units a day. If somebody asked them, hey, can you produce 1,100? They would have to say, no, we're not capable of producing 1,100 because given our fixed circumstances, we only have 5 machines, and in 24 hours, given the cool down period and given the restrictions on the machine, we can only produce 1,000 units. Well, what if they wanted to produce more? Well, we'll talk about that in just a little bit, okay? But let me ask you a couple other questions now before we move on to the possibility of them, trying to produce more than 1,000 units. Suppose one day, before we do that, let me point out a couple things. In each 12-hour period, right? In each 12-hour period, each machine employs 3 workers, right? So we have 3 workers working on the machine. in an 8-hour period, and then we have the 4-hour cool down. And those 3 workers produce 100 units. But in one day, they can actually have 2 shifts. They call it a second shift. So let's say one group of 3 workers comes in from, 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. Then the cool down happens from 4 p.m. until 8 p.m. And then at 8 p.m., 3 more workers come in and work from 8 p.m. until 4 a.m., and then the cool down goes from 4 a.m. until 8 a.m., okay? And so each machine can actually have 6 workers because we have 3 workers times 2 shifts. All right, so each machine can have 6 workers working on it in 24 hours, and they have 5 machines. So 5 machines times 6 workers, that means 30 workers. So UGI Corp can employ 30 workers. Now I want to remind you that workers are a variable resource. And so this fixed resource, we just used the productive capacity of a fixed resource to help us know how much of a variable resource we can have in the company, okay? Similarly, we can do the same thing with wood chips. In one production period, 12 hours, we can produce 100 units on the MIGI 630 Deluxe with 7 bags of wood chips, right? But they're going to run 2 shifts. So 2 times 7, that's 14 bags per machine in one day, in 24 hours. Also, they have 5 MIGI 630 Deluxes, so they're 14 bags per machine times 5 machines is 70. And so, in addition to being able to employ 30 workers per day, I guess you could say, they're going to use up 70 bags of wood chips per day. This is also a variable resource. Okay? And so what we're going to talk about in just a little bit is the relationship between fixed resources and variable resources. So let's say one day that 3 of the workers are sick. Let's say 3 of the workers, maybe 2 of them during the day shift and 1 of them during the night shift. Okay? So only 27 workers come to work that day. Now remember, the MIGI 630 Deluxe can operate with 2 workers. You don't have to have 3. You can operate it with 2 workers, but we said that it will not produce 100 units. It'll produce less than 100 units. So if 3 of the machines for one shift are going to run with 1 less worker, then that means 3 of the machines are going to produce less than the 200 over 2 shifts. Okay? So that means that UGI Corp is going to produce less than 1,000 units on that day. So then here's my question. My question is, does having fewer workers lower the productive capacity of UGI Corp on that day? The answer is no. It does not change the productive capacity of UGI. And let me explain. Let's go back to the definition and I'll explain. Productive capacity is the maximum possible quantity a firm can produce in a time period under a fixed set of circumstances, not under a variable set of circumstances. This definition makes no account at all for the variable resources. So even if they don't get all their variable resources, even if they don't get all 30 workers, or let's say they don't even get all 70 bags. Let's say one day the company that delivers the bags of wood chips can only deliver 61 bags. Well, now they're going to produce less than 1,000. But their productive capacity is still going to be 1,000. Why? Because their productive capacity isn't based on workers and bags. It's based on MIGI 630 Deluxes, the fixed resource. And so, because they still have 5 MIGI 630 Deluxes, and because those machines still produce 100 units per shift, and then in 2 shifts, 200 per day, 200 per day times 5 machines is still 1,000. Productive capacity is based only on fixed resources. Okay, let's say March 2020 rolls around, and halfway through the month, the worldwide pandemic, COVID-19 goes down around the world. And UGI Corp, just to play it safe, they tell their workers, hey, listen, we're going to shut down for a whole week. Everybody stay at home for a whole week, okay? And so all the workers stay at home, and they call up their supplier that supplies the 70 bags, and they say, hey, listen, don't send us any bags this week. We don't need any bags of wood chips this week. We're not going to produce at all, okay? So no workers, 0 bags. So of course their quantity that they're going to produce that week is 0. Did that change their productive capacity? No, because they still have their fixed resources. They still have 5 machines. Each machine could produce 200 units a day. 200 units a day times 5 machines is 1,000. And so even when the company is not operating, they still have the same productive capacity. And so then you may be asking yourself right now, you might say, well, can they ever change their productive capacity? Yes, they can. How? They have to change their fixed set of circumstances. If they change the fixed set of circumstances, it will change it'll change their productive capacity. So let's say after a lot of time, they've been producing a lot of these LTK 4217s. They've been selling a lot. They've been employing 30 workers, going through 70 bags a day. And their customers are starting to ask for more. They're saying, hey, look, we know that we're getting 1,000 from you, but we really, really wish we could get 2,000. The market, there's more households. The market's really up. The retailers are really asking for this thing. Can we get more of them from you? And UGI Corp says, well, not really, because we can only produce 1,000 a day. So what happens is the managers in UGI Corp, they all get together and they start talking about, well, can we figure out a way to make more than 1,000 units a day? And of course, you've probably already thought up a couple of possibilities already, okay? So one idea, of course, is, well, we can buy more MIGI 630 Deluxes. If we buy 5 more machines, we can produce another 1,000 units per day. The problem is UGI Corp can only fit 5 machines in their factory. Okay, well, that's okay. We can expand. We can go find another location that can fit 10 MIGI 630 Deluxes. Good idea. So that's one option. One option is they decide, they put a team together to go around looking for places that they could either rent or buy where they can fit 10 machines instead of only 5 machines. And they start talking to the MIGI Corporation and they ask them, hey, look, we're thinking about buying 5 more of the machines. Could you provide them to us? And in those conversations, the MIGI company tells them, well, it's funny you say that. Yes, we can provide you with more MIGI 630 Deluxes, but we think you would like to know that we've actually just released our newest machine for making LTK 4217s, and it's called the MIGI 630 Super Double Deluxe. And the MIGI 630 Super Double Deluxe has a few great features. First of all, double production. In an 8-hour period, 8 hours, still a 4-hour cooldown. 4-hour cooldown. Still need that cooldown. Stresses those parts. Okay, you want the machine to last a long time. But now it produces 200 units in 8 hours. And so, of course, it's going to need more bags of wood chips to produce 200 in 8 hours. And they said this, by the way, the MIGI 630 Super Double Deluxe has the same footprint as the MIGI 630 Deluxe. It takes up the same amount of space. So you can get rid of a MIGI 630 Deluxe and in its place just put a MIGI 630 Super Double Deluxe. We made sure to make it the exact same size so that our customers could expand and grow. Additionally, we did, so it's a double deluxe because it produces double. Why is it super? Oh, you're going to love this. It's super because it actually only requires 2 operators instead of 3 operators. And so if you expand, not only can you buy, let's say, 5 of these to replace the 5 that you have, but you could buy a few more if you expand to a bigger place, and then you can just keep all your employees and you can spread them out over over more machines, okay? And so this is a second option. They could stay in the same place and replace all the MIGI 630s with MIGI 630 Super Double Deluxes. That'll double their quantity because now they'll do 200 per shift. That's 400 per day per machine. With 5 machines, 5 times 400 would be 2,000 units. And they would double their productive capacity, okay? And so, but in order to do this, here's what I'm getting at, and this is what we're going to wrap up here, okay? Is that in order to increase their productive capacity, buying the MIGI 630 Super Double Deluxe or finding a new factory and buying more MIGI 630 Deluxes, all of those things are changes in their fixed set of circumstances. The reason their maximum possible quantity is increasing in the same time period is because they are changing their fixed costs. They're changing their fixed resources. They are adding more fixed resources. And that's what's going on here. This is how businesses grow. Businesses don't grow just by hiring more employees. They don't need more employees. If you hire too many employees and you don't increase the size of your fixed costs, you're just going to have too many employees walking around. We mentioned previously the problem of a restaurant that has too many cooks, right? If you have a kitchen in your restaurant and if you can only fit 6 cooks in your restaurant or in your kitchen, then you're hiring a 7th cook isn't going to help because you don't have any room for the 7th cook. If you want to increase your operation, you're actually going to have to increase the size of your kitchen, or at least increase the number of machines in your kitchen. When you increase your fixed resources, now you need another cook. So first, a business changes their fixed resources, and then after they've changed their fixed resources, then they can hire more and buy more variable resources, okay? And that's where we're going to go in the next part of this lesson. But this is the basic idea of productive capacity. It's the maximum possible quantity that a firm can produce given a specific time period, and they're always under a fixed set of circumstances.